And then we went on the road with the film, and that's a grueling part of making movies when you're part of the advertising end of it. It's a long slog sometimes.
Hollywood has spent more than 30 years arguing about what really happened on the set of Tombstone. Through all of it, one voice stayed unusually quiet: Sam Elliott's. While others told their side of the story, he rarely did. Now, he's finally pulling back the curtain on the chaos, the near disaster, and the moments that changed the movie forever. So what is Sam Elliott finally revealing about Tombstone? And why has he waited so long to tell it? Join us as we uncover what Sam Elliott just revealed about Tombstone that shocked fans. The hardest shoot of his life. Sam Elliott arrived in Arizona in the spring of 1993 as Virgil Earp, Wyatt's older brother, the man who carries the moral weight of the Earp family's decision to take a stand in Tombstone, and who pays the most immediate physical price when the Cowboys decide to retaliate. The role had drawn him because of the restraint Kevin Jarrah had written into it. Virgil Earp, in the original script, was not a man of many words. He was a man of deliberate action and contained feeling. And the understatement of that characterization was what had convinced Sam to sign on. He called the Tombstone shoot the hardest of his life. The Arizona summer heat was unrelenting. The wardrobe, heavy wool, leather boots, period-accurate hats that trapped heat, was genuinely punishing in temperatures that regularly pushed past 100 degrees. The shooting schedule was unpredictable in the way that troubled productions always are, which meant nobody knew from day to day how long they would be on set, or what they would be filming when they got there. Michael Biehn called it boot camp. Sam's description was less colorful and more total. The thing that nearly broke his commitment to the film was not the heat or the schedule, it was the script. As the production wore on and rewrites accumulated around Kevin Jarre's original material, Sam watched the character he had agreed to play slowly change into something he had not signed on for. Dialogue was being added, nuance was being removed. The restrained Virgil Earp of the original draft was acquiring the kind of generic Western hero qualities that Sam had specifically not wanted. The version of the character that could have been played by anyone, rather than the version that required the particular quality of stillness and weight that Sam brought to his best work. He was close to walking away for it all. What stopped him was Kurt Russell. The two men sat down together and went through the script line by line. Kurt, who by that point had effectively taken creative control of a production whose nominal director had been fired a month in, understood what Sam needed because he had read the same script and made the same assessment about what the film required from its performers. The conversation they had restored the version of Virgil Earp that Elliott had committed to playing. The restraint, the quiet authority, the physical weight without talking so much. Those qualities survived because Kurt understood why they were essential and went to the mat to protect them. Sam Elliott stayed, and the performance of Virgil Earp that ended up on screen, the combination of strength and vulnerability in the scenes where Virgil is shot, where he loses the use of his arm, where he has to be carried away from the fight by the brothers he came to Tombstone to protect, is one of the most genuinely affecting supporting performances in the film. It is that performance because Sam Elliott trusted Kurt Russell enough to stay on a set he was ready to leave. Staying was only part of the story. Years later, Sam Elliott revealed another moment from the making of Tombstone, one that perfectly captured how Kurt Russell held the production together, while few people outside the set even realized what was happening. The calm in chaos. The most widely reported Sam Elliott revelation about Tombstone is the one that has circulated most extensively since he gave a detailed interview to Entertainment Weekly in 2019 for the film's 25th anniversary. This is because it captures something essential about the dynamic of the production and about the difference between the man who was quietly running it and the man who could see clearly what the man running it could not. Kurt Russell was anxious about Kevin Costner. That is the fact at the center of the Holiday Inn story. While Tombstone was being filmed in Arizona, a much larger, much better-funded production called Wyatt Earp was simultaneously shooting in New Mexico, with Kevin Costner at its center and Lawrence Kasdan behind the camera. Kevin Costner in 1993 was at the absolute peak of his commercial power. Dances with Wolves had won him an Academy Award for Best Picture in 1991. The Bodyguard had made him an international superstar in 1992, and he was going into a direct confrontation with Tombstone as the odds-on favorite in a race to define how Hollywood told the Wyatt Earp story. The studio behind Tombstone was already nervous. They were so worried about where their film stood relative to Kevin Costner's that they essentially hid it from Siskel and Ebert, the most powerful film critics in America, to avoid negative early reviews that might make the comparison worse. Kurt, who had been carrying the creative weight of the production on his back for weeks, understood every dimension of the competitive situation they were in. The bigger budget on Kevin's side, the more willing studio, the star power that made Wyatt Earp look like the prestige production, and Tombstone looked like the scrappy alternative. Sam Elliott remembered sitting with Kurt at the Holiday Inn one night before shooting had properly begun. Kurt was angst-ridden. That was Sam Elliott's word for it. He was looking at a much bigger picture than any of his castmates, much bigger than all of them. And the size of that picture was producing the anxiety of someone who understood everything that could go wrong and was not yet certain that it wouldn't. Elliott told him to look at the script. He said, "They haven't got this script." Those 5 words were Sam Elliott's entire contribution to Kurt Russell's crisis of confidence on the night before they started making one of the most beloved westerns in cinema history. He was not offering a detailed strategic breakdown of why Tombstone would outperform Wyatt Earp. He was not analyzing the competitive landscape or the box office projections or the critical reception of Kevin Costner's recent work. He simply pointed at the thing they had that the other film did not, the stripped-down, character-driven version of the Wyatt Earp story that Kevin Jarre had written, and that Kurt Russell had spent weeks refining into something lean, urgent, and true. Wyatt Earp opened in the summer of 1994 to mixed reviews and limp ticket sales. It failed to recoup its budget. Kevin Costner was nominated for the Razzie Award for Worst Actor. Tombstone, by contrast, had already been in theaters for 6 months by that point, building word of mouth through the mechanism that makes certain films last, audience members going back to watch it again, recommending it to people who hadn't seen it, turning quotes into shared language. Sam Elliott had been right. However, Kurt Russell's anxiety was not the only revelation that Sam had shared so far. Let's talk about what he revealed regarding the secret Kurt kept for a decade: the ghost director. One of the most significant things Sam Elliott revealed across his Tombstone interviews over the years is not a piece of information he disclosed first. It is the way his account aligned with and corroborated what Kurt Russell eventually said himself, an account that Kurt had kept silent for more than a decade out of a promise he made to a man he called into the job. When Kevin Jarre was fired a month into production, the studio needed a replacement director fast. Kurt knew who he wanted: George P. Cosmatos, the Greek-Italian director who had helmed Rambo, First Blood Part 2 for Sylvester Stallone. Kurt had called Sylvester for exactly this reason. He needed someone who could front a production while the actual creative decisions were being made by someone else, and George had done exactly that for Sylvester on Rambo. The arrangement was well understood by everyone involved before George ever arrived on set. Kurt Russell has described the arrangement with complete clarity in the interviews he eventually gave after George Cosmatos' death in 2005. He gave George a shot list every night. He went to George's room, laid out what was going to be filmed the next day, in what order, with what coverage requirements. George's job was to execute that list in front of the crew and the studio without revealing that the list had come from his star rather than from himself. Russell said he didn't want to put his name on it. He wanted someone else to be the visible face of the production, so the studio didn't have to publicly acknowledge that their director had been replaced by their leading actor. Val Kilmer supported Kurt Russell's account directly, saying that Kurt essentially directed the film while being careful not to go further than the evidence supported. Val Kilmer had moved in with Kurt during parts of the production specifically so they could use the extra time to work through the script and the schedule. The 20 minutes they would have spent driving between their separate accommodations were 20 minutes of additional preparation, applied to a production that needed every advantage available to it. What Sam Elliott's account added to the Kurt-George revelation is texture. He described the qualities that Kurt brought to the production in the weeks after Jara's departure, not the technical details of shot lists and schedule management, but the human quality of someone who understood what each performer needed in order to do their best work, and who was willing to protect those needs even when the pressure was highest. The meeting about the Virgil Earp script, the Holiday Inn conversation, the care Kurt Russell took to make sure that Sam Elliott stayed in the film and that the Virgil Earp on screen was the Virgil Earp that Elliott had committed to playing. Those are not the actions of a star protecting his own interests. Those are the actions of someone who understood that the film's quality depended on every performer in it doing the best possible version of their work, and who was willing to spend his own time and energy making sure that happened. Looking back, Kurt Russell's commitment to making Tombstone the best film it could be says something important about the cast that made it. So when Val Kilmer passed away, what Sam Elliott chose to say about him carried a weight that only decades of shared history could give it. What Sam Elliott said about Val Kilmer. Val Kilmer died on April 1st, 2025, at 65 years old from pneumonia. He had been dealing with serious health issues for years, a throat cancer diagnosis in 2014, treatments that permanently altered his voice, the AI-assisted voice reconstruction that allowed him to appear in Top Gun, Maverick in 2022. His death prompted an immediate wave of tributes from the people who had worked with him, and among the most emotionally resonant were the statements from his Tombstone castmates. Sam Elliott's understanding of what Val Kilmer had done on the set of Tombstone runs through every interview he has given about the film. Because the performance Val delivered as Doc Holliday is inseparable from the film's identity, the character that Val Kilmer created, the physicality of a dying man who carries his mortality with a kind of freedom that healthy men cannot access, the cadences of a 19th century Southern gentleman whose tuberculosis has stripped away every social inhibition while leaving his mind razor-sharp, is what Tombstone is remembered for in the way that Shakespeare plays are remembered for the best performance in them. Sam understood what Val had done. He had been on the set every day watching it happen, watching him build something that was not simply great acting, but was the kind of acting that changes what you think acting can accomplish. He described the Tombstone shoot as the hardest of his career, which is a significant statement from a man who had been making films for 20 years by that point. But the hardship of the shoot was inseparable from the quality of what the difficulty produced. And the quality of what the difficulty produced was centered on Val Kilmer's performance. The film that existed because of Kurt Russell's creative control and Sam Elliott's confidence in the script, and Val Kilmer's performance opened on Christmas Day 1993 and grossed $73 million worldwide. It became, over years of home video viewings and cable television broadcasts, and eventually streaming, one of the most watched and most quoted films of its era. The numbers tell one story. what happened behind the scenes tells another. How did a film that would go on to become one of the most celebrated westerns of its generation come so close to being overlooked at the very beginning? The film that was nearly buried. Here is the irony that Sam Elliott has never been shy about pointing out in interviews about Tombstone's legacy. The film that is now considered one of the greatest westerns ever made was treated at its release with a caution so extreme that the studio actively worked to keep it away from the critics who might have endorsed it. The decision to keep Tombstone away from Siskel and Ebert was made by a studio that did not trust its own product, that looked at what they had and compared it to Wyatt Earp's budget and Kevin Costner's star power, and decided that the safest thing to do was to avoid giving the comparison any critical oxygen. If Siskel and Ebert weighed in and came down on Kevin Costner's side, the narrative was set before the audience had a chance to make its own judgment. The audience made its own judgment anyway. The word of mouth that built Tombstone's audience in those early weeks was not generated by critical endorsement or advertising spend or any of the conventional mechanisms through which studios grow a film's audience. It was generated by people leaving the cinema and calling their friends. It was generated by the quality of individual scenes. True West magazine, the oldest publication covering the American West, named Tombstone one of the 5 greatest westerns ever made in its very first year. The film now sits at a 72% on Rotten Tomatoes, not exceptional by modern standards, but buoyed by an audience score what tells you precisely what those certified fresh percentages cannot. That the film connected with the people who watched it in a way that critical gatekeeping was not going to intercept. Tombstone was built by actors who understood exactly what the film needed from them, and Sam Elliott was also one of the most important among them. Sam Elliott's place in it. Sam Elliott turned 49 during the production of Tombstone. He had been working as a professional actor since 1969, building a career across 24 years of television westerns, feature films, and the kind of character work that demonstrated genuine craft without generating the leading man attention that makes careers into cultural phenomena. He is the kind of actor that better actors wanted to work with because his quality of presence made everything around him more credible. His Virgil Earp is, by his own description, the version that the script's rewrites tried to take from him and that Kurt Russell helped him defend. The performance on screen is the performance of a man who knew what he had signed on for and was not willing to let a production under pressure turn it into something generic. The fact that he had to fight for that the fight required a conversation with his leading man that went through the script line by line, is itself part of the story of what Tombstone is and why it is what it is. Everything that happened on that Arizona set in the summer of 1993 happened to a group of people who understood what they were trying to make and were willing to sacrifice comfort, predictability, and in some cases professional safety to make it correctly. Sam Elliott staying on a film he nearly quit. Kurt Russell taking creative control of a production and then spending a decade honoring a promise not to publicize it. Val Kilmer preparing for Doc Holliday with the specific research and commitment of someone who understood that the role was a once-in-a-career opportunity and was not going to approximate it. The hardest shoot of Sam Elliott's life produced the most enduring film of his filmography, and the man who told Kurt Russell in a Holiday Inn in Arizona that they had the script, the thing nobody else had, turned out to be the most accurate prophet of record in one of Hollywood's most celebrated underdog stories. They hadn't got that script. He was right. And 32 years later, the gap between what Tombstone became and what it was up against in 1993 is so large that it is genuinely difficult to remember that anyone was ever worried. After hearing the story behind Tombstone, which moment do you think had the biggest impact on turning it into the classic it is today? Which person do you think deserves the most credit for helping Tombstone overcome its challenges and become one of the greatest westerns ever made? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.